Hello, Autism Video 3. Um, I'm going to, I tried to do this video a couple times, but I ended up tangenting off too much on too many childhood things. She hates my talk. Off you go. So I'm going to try to get a little briefer through this. This is just kind of the history of where I am now and why I'm discussing autism with people. Not autism. Well, it is autism, but autism was a diagnosis that was a little stricter years ago. It's now called the ASD, Autistic Spectrum Disorder. Yes, ASD. And on that spectrum is Asperger's. I'm going to link I just watched a video. I've been trying to find videos of people who aren't, most of what I read and most of what I see on videos, on vlogs, are people who have autism. Various other forms of autism, more serious, more easily diagnosable, more noticeable autism. And I've been looking for somebody who suffered more from Asperger's. So I typed in high functioning autism, and I found a video of a dad who started I guess a month or two ago, started doing vlogs with his 10-year-old autistic or high functioning autistic / Asperger's son. And I watched the video, and it's extremely reminiscent of, it reminds me a lot of my childhood and behavior and various children I taught over the years. And some of the comments afterwards were interesting because a lot of the people, well, not a lot, there's a couple people that commented and said, there's nothing wrong with your son. He's totally normal in that video. He's like a normal 10-year-old kid. I don't know why you as an American need to label him and whatever, give him medication, whatever. First of all, there's no medication for autism or ASD disorders. ASD, yeah, ASD. So it's not a moneymaker, I guess maybe for psychiatrists, but it does help to isolate various people's dysfunctions so that they're at least aware of it and can make adjustments through life and possibly forewarn people, such as I'm doing right now. Anyway, on to the history. I'm going to link it below. The kid's super cute. Everybody should watch it. And it's a really good indication. The dad kind of points out a couple of the things that the kid did just that day that were kind of signs of having Asperger's. And again, it caused me to remember a whole bunch of things from my childhood where Asperger's didn't exist until basically 1991. So there's no chance of me being diagnosed. Under the current definition of autism back then, there was no chance of me being diagnosed. That doesn't mean I'm ASD, and I'm going to go through that. So my history is I've always had issues socializing with people, but I've gone through periods, and I've analyzed this in different ways. I went through periods where I thought I was going from extrovert to introvert to extrovert to introvert, and on the introvert phases where I would read books and hide in a corner, I ended up having no friends for 2, 3, 4 years in a row. And then I have an extrovert phase where I'd be friends with basically everyone in my class. And then that would go for a year or two, and then I'd go back to having no friends for a couple of years, and it was just this huge sine wave of behavior. So when I got to my 20s, I kind of self-diagnosed myself along with a whole bunch of other things, agoraphobic, telephonophobic, I think I have very mild dyslexia, and I'm sure I have mild dyslexia. I've read the signs. Again, that's a spectrum thing. So, but I often misspell words in different order and read sentences wrong. And occasionally on tests, when a sentence is listed for a question, I can't understand what the sentence means. Various other signs, but again, mild enough that I could get by it easily enough. So I diagnosed myself as part of my process of trying to cover all the weird things I was discovering in life. I diagnosed myself antisocial. And that lasted for about 10 or 15 years, and I had no real problem with this diagnosis. This is before Google existed, so I couldn't really get a firm definition of what antisocial was. I guess the first time I ran into it was in Good Will Hunting. They had a little conversation about the guy who bombed, I can't remember what his name is, Timothy McVeigh maybe, or something like that. There's a professor who just went off the deep end of antisocial behavior and eventually bombed a couple buildings and killed a bunch of people, I guess. And he was labeled antisocial. And that was you know, it was around this time that it started to percolate into my brain that maybe this wasn't the right thing. The thing that really clicked it off was because I'd gone for years with that label on myself, and I was totally happy with it. It was due to one of my students in Labrador. This is probably the second or third year I was in Labrador. One of the mothers came up to me, Shelley, and said, "Oh, you know, we were just making conversation, or she was making conversation. I was standing awkwardly, trying to participate, not very well. But she said, you know, we had a party last night, and Shannon was talking to a bunch of her relatives. I think it was aunts and uncles, and she said, "Oh yeah, I have a coach, David. I really like him. He's antisocial, and I really like him, and he's great." And everybody in the room was like, "He's antisocial. Well, what does she mean?" And the mother said, "Oh, you know, I told her it wasn't appropriate for her to call him antisocial." And Shannon was like, "But he calls himself antisocial. He had defined that for us. It's a label I'm perfectly healthy. I'm perfectly happy applying to myself." Anyway, the mother had such a negative reaction to it, and I didn't really understand. I'm like, "What's wrong with being antisocial?" So I think it was a couple of years after that, I ran into it online, just Googling. And I Googled antisocial behavior. How do you know you're antisocial? 10 signs you're antisocial, whatever I Googled. And I came up with a list, basically a top 10 or top 15 list of how you know you're antisocial. And went through the list and found that I actually only really fit in well with about 4 of the 12 or 15 criteria they set, and some of them I was completely against. So I was like, oh, okay, well, is 4 out of 10, 4 to 12, 4 to 15 enough to label me antisocial? And I eventually decided no. You know, I read a couple other articles. I just didn't fit into enough. And at this point, I kind of ran into a lot of videos on the difference between or astrology and charlatans and snake charmers and snake oil sellers, whatever you call them, not snake charmers. And the fact that the reason why astrology works and so many people buy into it is because they keep it vague enough. They list 4 or 5 really vague things, and if people connect with 2 or 3 of them, they think, oh, well, okay, I'm a Pisces, I'm a Taurus, I'm a Cancer, I'm a whatever. And in actual fact, they're all so vague that if you took the horoscope or the description of a different sign, a different month, it would still apply to you as equally. And I did this experiment a couple times with myself where I took all 12 horoscopes or all 12 descriptions of what my personality was supposed to be like and read them all. And there were literally maybe 2 or 3 that I could rule out, and they weren't like all the earth signs I could rule out. It was like 1 earth sign, 1 water sign, 1 air sign that totally didn't apply to me, that couldn't really be used to describe me. And the other 9 fit me certainly enough, and some of them to a T. Probably about 5 of them fit me completely. It was like they were talking about me, and yet because they all applied, I knew they weren't talking to me. So I kind of got the idea that maybe antisocial is not what I actually am. I did a little research into what asocial was. That's the first time I'd heard of asocial behavior, asocial tendencies, and that was closer. That was a lot closer. So I kind of switched my version, and I stopped introducing myself as antisocial. I stopped applying that title to other people, because antisocial are basically people who never want to have anything to do with society, don't want to talk to people, don't want to socialize, and none of that was me. I had a lot of problems adapting to society. I didn't understand rules of socialization. I was extremely awkward and uncomfortable, and it was even painful to socialize. But at no point did I not want to do it. I didn't want to do it because it was painful and awkward. But you know, if I can get in situations where I'm talking one-on-one with someone, or in a very small group, or in an environment that is safe and comfortable, and there aren't too many sounds or too many noises going on around me, then I'm totally fine socializing. And also, if we don't have an agenda to do something else, there's nothing that bothers me more than saying we're going to get together to eat dinner, and then we go somewhere to socialize for an hour and a half and chat before we eat dinner. No, we were getting together to eat dinner. We need to eat dinner. That's what we're here for. We're eating dinner. I don't care if we talk while we eat dinner, but that is our agenda. We've got to follow the agenda, you liars. Anyway, that's a little tangent there, but probably totally relevant. I've had kind of the same issue with depression. There's a few times where I know people who were diagnosed with depression and family members who were diagnosed with depression. This was around the same time. So I would research depression and think that I had suffered from depression, and maybe I have. But again, they list several things that are criteria of being in a depressed state, feeling depression, and I would apply to, maybe 2 out of 5 or 2 out of 8. I would actually apply to me completely, fit together completely. So a lot of times that's not the issue that's causing me to have socialization problems. There was something after that. I mean, like I said, I tried to, I thought I was agoraphobe, mildly agoraphobic, mildly telephonophobic, afraid of telephones, afraid of groups of people, afraid of loud noises. I really don't like loud noises. That's part of the reasons I don't like telephones. Can't stand loud music in rinks. It distracts me from my work and hurts me. I'm going to have to start wearing headphones in the rink, I think, just to block out all the sounds. A lot of the coaches like really loud music, and it's painful. It's actually physically painful to me, and my brain doesn't work properly when I have sounds coming at me. Even with my Erlin lenses, Mom. Another issue. My mom's convinced that I have some kind of eye disorder where these are corrective lenses that help me. They make sure there's not too much harmful light reaching my eyes. There's certain spectrums of light that my brain doesn't process properly, and these filter that out, so therefore I'm able to stay calmer and filter out different sounds, and certain input won't disrupt me as much because I'm filtering out some of the harmful rays, but whatever. Then I went through a 7 or 8 year period where I labeled myself something else. This is right at my tip of my tongue for the last week. I can't remember what it was, but I used to self-label as something else. Not asocial, something even more specific than that. Huh. It's going to be a great video if I have to spend 5 minutes here humming and hawing to figure it out. Oh, I don't remember. Anyway, and most people were fine labeling me and associating me as antisocial, and kids didn't have a problem with it because they didn't have an idea of what antisocial was, and then when I applied it to myself, they moved the idea on top of me. They knew me, and then I said I was antisocial, so they associated some of the things I did with antisocial. Whereas adults that have a fully formed opinion of antisocial, when I say I'm antisocial, when I apply a label to myself, they're not just applying the 4 or 5 facets of that actually apply to me. They're applying all of it. And antisocial people tend to be criminals. They tend to be violent. They tend to be... There's a lot of things that antisocial people do that just totally don't apply to me at all. Oh, I know what it was. I knew if I rambled enough it would come back to it. So after that, I ran into the term sociopath. And for the longest time, I knew the term psychopath, which I wasn't, because I'm not violent. I don't like to hurt animals. I still suffer from an intense amount of guilt from hurting a couple animals, or one animal in particular, when I was 7 or 8. And I cut the whiskers off my cat because I thought they were too long for her when I was like 9. And I don't feel terrible guilt about that, but I feel bad about it, and it sticks out of my mind as something that's unfathomable to me now. Anyway, so I live with myself. So I heard a CBC podcast on sociopaths, and how sociopaths are, you tend to think they're the murderers in the movies, and they are. They usually are. Almost all mass murderers, serial killers are sociopaths. But also, apparently, good politicians are sociopaths, good lawyers are sociopaths. There's a lot of other professions that require you to be a sociopath in order to be good at it, especially if lying is a part of your job, as both those professions are. And I read a couple books on it of people who were professors and scientists and various other things who identified as sociopaths, and wrote about their difficulty in connecting with other people and fitting in with societal norms and stuff. So I thought for a while, superficially, that was probably what I should label myself. But I definitely didn't want to label myself as that because it has way too many negative connotations. And this only lasted for maybe 5 years. And then I went online and I ran into an article where it labeled kind of the core criteria of sociopaths. I think it was after Dexter started, because Dexter was labeled a sociopath. So I looked up sociopath, and apparently sociopaths are people who can't fit in, who don't feel emotions. They don't connect with other people. which isn't quite what autism is, but it's close. We don't connect with other people, definitely. It's hard, very hard. But sociopaths. Oh, but they desperately try to fit in, and they fake it. They do a very good job of passing themselves off as normal, which is not only an aspect of Dexter, but an aspect of a whole bunch of other books and articles I've read since, and podcasts I've heard. I think I've heard one podcast on sociopaths. And I just don't do that. I make no effort to fit in. I don't care about fitting in. I've never considered it important to be part of a clique. I've never considered it important to be fashionable. I've never considered it important to be polite. I think it's dishonest. I think it's lying. I've never considered it important to be diplomatic, to be tactful. There's a whole bunch of dishonest things that a sociopath would say, okay, I recognize these constructs and I will act in a way that's normal to fit into these constructs. I mean, I've never really felt that way. Occasionally I go out of my way to try to do what other people expect of me, and often when somebody gives me a kind of a traditional rote greeting, I reflexively give them the traditional response, but not very often, like 1 out of 5. Like, hey, how are you today? Oh, I'm great, how are you? That's a traditional exchange. I almost 1 out of 10 times I might accidentally do that when my mind's on other things and I'm not thinking, but usually I will not respond that way. I often grunt. I often say nothing, drop my head and walk away. And most often, if it's somebody that I want to talk to, I will actually answer their question, which nobody wants. Hey, how are you today? They don't want to hear an answer. They don't want to hear an elaborate, long answer. They want to be able to walk by you and get that response and go on their way. That's traditional social behavior, which I don't understand and don't agree with and think is wrong. And, if you're going to ask me what my day is, you should actually be interested in what my day is. Otherwise, you're lying. By the way, one of the websites I went on said that, I haven't found this again, but they said one of the general symptoms of Asperger's is that you have an unnatural preoccupation with honesty and rules, which is, now, might shock a few people to think I'm honesty with rules, or I'm preoccupied with rules, but I'm totally preoccupied with the rules. I also recognize when rules are stupid and don't follow them and completely ignore them, which is not how most people deal with rules. Most people, if they think a rule is stupid, they'll make it look like they're following it, but find sneaky ways around it. I just completely ignore and obliterate it. I think if a rule is wrong, it should either be changed or updated or made clearer, or I have real problem with rules. But when I make rules for myself, they're pretty airtight and need to be followed. Although, just like a contract, you can update it. You can say, okay, that rule didn't work. Let's change this wording. Let's change that. Let's make the rule a little different. I know I haven't found that on a lot of the Asperger's side. Otherwise, I'd be more invested in labeling myself that. But I found it fascinating that that was listed on one site. Anyway. So eventually I came up with this list of what sociopaths are and what they do, and some of the dominant features I just don't have at all. Some of the kind of superficial features that you see later I have, but not the dominant ones. So it didn't take me too long to say, okay, that's not what I am. I just don't fit enough of the criteria. I don't fit enough of the main criteria. I fit a lot of the tertiary criteria, but apparently that's not right. Anyway. So by this point, I think I'd been diagnosed with Asperger's by 2 different people. The second one was a friend of mine, Colin, in university, who he's been in university for like 30 years doing various things, but he tends to focus a lot on education and sociology and some psychology and philosophy and various stuff like that. And in one of his classes, he ran across Asperger's and autism spectrum disorders and stuff like that, and he was, I think he texted me right away, or we were having dinner, and he said, yeah, I think you're definitely Asperger's. But of course, I'm not going to listen to that. I dismissed it. But last year, last January, it was strongly recommended to me by several people that I was having trouble getting over something. Still haven't gotten over it. So they said, you need to go to a therapist, and the way things were going, I needed to go to a therapist. So I went to a therapist last January, Finally got in, and this person who recommended it to me actually knew about 30 or 40 therapists. It was her job to recommend therapists, and she's like, oh yeah, there's like 25 that I would definitely not send you to. They're not right for you. You need somebody who can kind of follow your lines of thought, has at least close to the same level of intellect and analysis procedures as you. And so she basically, two names popped into her head, and I decided to go with the female for various reasons. That I think were legitimate and right. And so I started going to therapy, and we started once a week. And then I realized like there's no way I could possibly afford this, so I started tapering it off, and eventually stopped going. I think June or mid-June, late June, the end of June was my last thing. And for the first time, I was just working through this particular problem for the first 4 or 5 sessions, and then she started getting into my life in general at large. And she would comment on various things that kept repeating in my sessions, and occasionally she would notice something that had appeared several times, and I would say, okay, does that mean I'm this? Because I have enough self-diagnosis to say, does that mean I'm suffering from this? And she's like, no, I don't think so, because while you meet this criteria, you don't meet this one, so I don't think you're this, and I don't think you're that. And she was really hesitant to label me as anything, which I found was interesting and refreshing and not what I expected. She wouldn't let me label myself things. She just wanted to take a good look at everything. But about the second or third last session we did, she said, I really think you suffer from Asperger's. And she brought out, as she usually does, she had books behind her. She brought out a book and opened it to a page of symptoms, and we ran through, I think, 7 or 8 of the symptoms or something. And sure enough, in some way or another, I was able to fit into every symptom of it, unlike with sociopaths, unlike with antisocial people, where I couldn't even fit into half of them. With this, I was able to fit into, pretty easily to 8 out of 10. And since then, I've gone on a bunch of different websites, WebMD and stuff like that, and found other lists of symptoms. And always I meet the majority of them. Now there's 1 or 2 that I don't meet that concern me because they show up in every list. An adherence to routine is one of them, where people have a routine and they get very upset if the routine is shifted, if a toy is moved. I should show you around my place. I have, that's my filing system. It's just not, I guess cluttered. There's nothing about neatness in any of the videos I saw. So that doesn't mean anything, but, and I was never able to keep a routine in school. I was never able to keep a routine in skating because I skated different times at night. Maybe I was forced into a situation because I was never exposed to routine. I was never able to get addicted to it. I was never able to get adjusted to it. I don't know. I don't know how to explain that. It may be that I'm not ASD. It may be that there's something else that I haven't yet discovered, but ASD is certainly the closest thing that I've found that covers most of the spectrum of what I experience. You add that into the Erland syndrome and the dyslexia, and that covers a great deal of my problems. Essentially, if I'm willing to label myself Asperger syndrome, I'm able to take away about 8 previous labels I've had to use to try to sort of poorly cover some of the symptoms. Autistic, telephonophobic, not liking loud noises, not liking bright lights, not liking being in bars, not liking weird smells. There's a lot of textures I don't like, especially when it comes to food. All of that is very, very autistic in nature, very, very ASD. Now, this is ongoing. Apparently, there are tests. I've recently found there are actual official tests to be labeled, to be clinically labeled as Asperger's, which I haven't officially gone. I don't even know if there is an official way to go through it. Do I just ask my therapist? Anyway, I don't know what the process is. I'm eventually going back to therapy. I quite like the therapy, and even though we never actually dealt with any of the issues I went there for, we dealt with other issues. Every single session had something. There was something I got out of it. Now the question I have to ask is, did I get $300 worth out of every session? Probably not. But even if I got $20 of value out of every session, is it worth getting that $20 and overpaying drastically for it rather than not getting that at all? We'll see. Because apparently there's government programs where I can actually get help, a lot of help. And I know a lot of people who have, I met some people online who have Asperger's who have people come to their house and help them with things like shopping and stuff like that, clean their house, various other things that they can't handle. Although, as I said earlier, most Asperger's patients are functional, autonomously functional, and many times go undiagnosed their entire lives. There's another video I watched today, which I probably should link, on the history of autism, where it talks about how, you talk about the geeky scientist and the antisocial or the absent-minded professor, and these are essentially autistic stereotypes. So there are socially acceptable stereotypes of people who are socially awkward who have Asperger's disorder, who have existed enough to enter the public paradigm, the public consciousness. I keep looking here, and I should probably be looking where the camera is, which is what, there? Oh well. I'll just put that down to Asperger's too. Anyway, I'm going to link one link with this father who's doing a series of videos on his autistic kid, his Asperger's kid, that I think is fascinating. I think that's it. So again, I'm not fully committed to labeling myself Asperger's yet, even if somebody clinically diagnosed me as Asperger's, which has, I've been diagnosed by a professional, but not, I don't know if you get a card, a membership card, or a piece of paper or something. I don't know what the process is, but I might not follow it anyway. I might be a little skeptical. I tend to be skeptical at psychiatric labeling, since they tend to be revising their opinion and changing their opinion every few years. A little like coaching technique. You just can't marry any one particular idea or concept or label, because it's constantly evolving and changing. Anyway, that's it for this video. Sorry it was personal and boring and droned on, but that's why I'm not sending it to everyone I know, but I am sending it to people that I work with on a regular basis, so you have some kind of, even if I'm not Asperger's, you have some kind of idea of what the situation is, and they have stressed that people who deal with you have to be aware of your problems and how to deal with it. Camera's over here. It's weird that I don't look at the camera. I wonder if I turned it to the other side if I was. Anyway. Alright, that's it. Bye.